let's go ahead and jump into the file key details, with a general discussion highlighting the background and key details for each file type submitted in Fall 1. We'll begin with the SSID Enrollment or the SENR file type. There are trainings on the CSIS YouTube training channel, which cover each of these file types in depth, and the video for each individual file type is about 1 hour long. What we will present today is a condensed version. For clarification and further information, please take a look at the extended discussions of each file type on the CSIS YouTube training channel. All right, let's get started by covering some key points about the SSID Enrollment or SENR file type. The SSID Enrollment file is needed to first gain ownership of student records, which allows you to submit subsequent records for the student. The duration of LEA ownership of student records is from the enrollment start date to the enrollment exit date at your LEA in the student's SENR record. Again, this ownership is required to report any subsequent records in CalPADS and is established with the SENR. The SENR is also used to determine cohort inclusion for secondary students for the Adjusted Cohort Graduation Rate, or ACGR, as well as cumulative enrollment in end of year 3. The SENR establishes a district of geographic residence, transfer reasons, and enrollment statuses, whether primary, secondary, short-term, or one of the other enrollment statuses. SENR exits, and in particular exit reason codes, determine graduation, dropouts, and completers, and can be used to denote returning, transferring, and matriculating students. Some example exit reasons include E155, year-end enrollment exit, expected enrollment in the same school next academic year. T160 indicates a transfer to another California public school. E230 is a completer exit, and so on. There are several codes in the CalPADS code sets document for values in the student exit reason code field of the SENR record. SENR exits indicate post-secondary transition from middle to high school, graduation, and program completion. All right, we did mention ownership on the previous slide, so let's go ahead and talk to ownership directly. So what is ownership? Ownership dictates who has the ability to maintain student data. Ownership of an SSID allows the LEA to submit and update records related to a student's profile during the enrollment period. SENR start and end dates determine the period of ownership of student records in CalPADS. To add, update, or delete student information, LEAs must have ownership of the student record. And if you get a GERR5 or a GERR0005 error, you do not have ownership of the student records, meaning the student isn't enrolled at your LEA during the reporting period. And you should always check the SENR record start and end dates at your LEA, as well as the school of attendance when you encounter the GERR5 error. All right, let's go ahead and talk now about changes to the SENR record in the 23 to 24 academic year. And we'll begin with the new TK grade level. Formerly, TK students were enrolled in CalPADS with a grade level of kindergarten and a program record with program code 185 to indicate participation in the Transitional Kindergarten program. Beginning with the 23 to 24 school year, TK will be processed in CalPADS as a grade level rather than as a program. In 23 to 24, LEAs must submit a new grade level of Transitional Kindergarten in SENR records for students attending Transitional Kindergarten. The former 185 program code is now retired. There will be no migration of data, but the system will close out all 185 program records that have not been closed based on an overlapping SENR exit date. Students who will turn 4 years old by September 1st are able to be enrolled in CalPADS, allowing LEAs to test TK students who are 4 years old by September 1st with the initial LPAC. Students who turn 5 on or before April 2nd, 2024 will be included in funding calculations. All right, there is another lower profile change happening in CalPADS for the 23 to 24 academic year regarding grade level, specifically the toddler and infant grade levels formerly reported. Previously, the infant grade level was defined as a grade level for individuals ages 0 to 18 months. The toddler grade level was previously defined as a grade level for individuals ages 19 to 35 months, not yet enrolled in a public education institution. New this academic year, the toddler grade level is now retired. The infant grade level has been updated to include individuals ages 0 to 18 months, and the enrollment in a public institution clause has been removed. Infants are now considered to be individuals ages 0 to 35 months. All right. Also new in SENR records this academic year is the completion status code of 102, Pathway Diploma for Students with Disabilities. The Pathway Diploma for Students with Disabilities is a state-defined alternate diploma. A state-defined alternate diploma is a diploma that, 1, is standards-based, and 2, is aligned with the state's requirement for the regular high school diploma. Under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA, has the option to offer a state-defined alternate diploma to an eligible student with the most significant cognitive disabilities and count the student as a graduate in the state's ACGR if the student receives the alternate diploma during the time period for which the state ensures the availability of FAPE. California is taking this opportunity to introduce the new completion status code of 102, Pathway Diploma for Students with Disabilities, in the SENR record. This completion status is defined as an alternate diploma given that is standards-based and aligned with the state's requirements for the regular high school diploma. This diploma is given to an eligible student with the most significant cognitive disabilities, and only if the student has taken the state's alternate assessment aligned with the alternate academic achievement standards under Section 1111B2D of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and met any other state-defined requirements. The next change up is Senate Bill 532 and the changes in exemptions and alternatives to graduation requirements. Beginning this academic year, LEAs will be required to collect specific data on students who graduate with an exemption for local graduation requirements. The new data that LEAs will now need to report includes an exemption for local graduation requirements indicator field with selections of yes and no in the SENR record. This field must be populated in the SENR record for all students with an exit code of E230, complete or exit, and a school completion status code of 100, graduated standard high school diploma. Using the new exemption for local graduation requirement indicator field, LEAs will annually report the number of pupils who, for the prior school year, graduated with an exemption from the LEA's graduation requirements that are in addition to the statewide coursework requirements. This data shall be reported for pupils graduating in the 4th year and 5th year cohorts and should be disaggregated by cohort, pupil, category, race, and disability status. The CDE will make the data publicly available on an annual basis, aligned with the other reporting timelines for the California dashboard graduation data. The Senate Bill 532 reporting requirement will begin with students who entered 9th grade in the 22 to 23 school year. All right, let's talk about 2 new changes to the SSID match tool in the 23 to 24 academic year. First, Elasticsearch will be added to the SSID match tool, now allowing for probabilistic matching. For example, populating students with the legal first name Robert when the first name Bob is entered into the SSID match tool. The user interface will be identical, and there is no change in the process to utilize Elasticsearch probabilistic matching with the SSID match tool. The results file that you download will include the Elasticsearch probabilistic matching results. We understand the difficulties that you have all had with the SSID match tool, and we hope that Elasticsearch will help to alleviate some of those issues. The second change is a school-level filter added to the SSID match tool. Formerly, school-level users were able to view data from other schools in their LEA in the SSID match tool. In order for the security to be school level only, this filter needed to be added, similar to the SSID candidate list. Well, the last change here related to the SSI or the SENR record, the CalPADS SSID extract will have 2 additional fields this academic year, including date range by SSID create date, defined as the date the SSID enrollment was created in CalPADS, and the student initial U.S. school enrollment date, K through 12, defined as the student initial U.S. enrollment date in a K through 12 setting, derived from the SINF table in the CalPADS ODS. These changes are meant to ease the migration of data from CalPADS to your local student information system and from your local student information system to CalPADS. And the majority of changes in the 23 to 24 academic year are in the SENR record. The student information record is required for all students. In fact, when you submit an SENR record for the first time, a shell SINF record is created in CalPADS, which you will have to be sure to update. The SINF file contains demographic and address information about your student and is used for the purposes listed on the slide. SINF records are used to indicate race and ethnicity, legal and preferred names, gender and gender changes, address history, direct certification matching at the state level. It is used to identify students who are Title III eligible immigrants and include students in the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroups. So why are student information records important, and how are they used both inside and outside of CalPADS? Within CalPADS, SINF records are used to identify students in certain subgroup categories. For example, socioeconomically disadvantaged, Title III eligible immigrant, and non-traditional gender. Outside of CalPADS, SINF records are used for state-level matching with direct certification of foster youth, and for accountability purposes by oversight agencies and the CDE. And there are 2 new changes to the parent or guardian data that you submit in the SINF record in the 23 to 24 academic year. Formerly, the highest education level could only be populated for a single parent or guardian in the SINF record. In the 23 to 24 academic year, the highest education level must be populated for both parents or guardians if both parent-guardian name fields are populated. There will be an additional parent-guardian highest education level field in the SINF record where you can populate the additional information. The socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup calculation will be updated to include the following criteria. Students where both parents are not high school graduates are included in the socioeconomically disadvantaged count. As with previous business rules, a response of decline to state will not be included in the socioeconomically disadvantaged calculation. The second change is regarding parent-guardian names and what you will be required to populate in the system. In the 23 to 24 academic year, both a first and a last name will be required to be populated. So if the first name is populated, the last will be required. And if the last name is populated, the first name will be required, as enforced by input validation errors. In preparation for this change, you are able to check the parent guardian name data contained in your local student information system and ensure that both the first and last name fields are populated for your parents or guardians. With both changes taken into account, it's noteworthy that if any field is populated for a second parent or guardian, all fields will need to be populated, including first name, last name, and highest level of education. All right, and that concludes our discussion of the SINF file with the changes to the parent guardian highest education level fields. Let's go ahead and move on to the student programs or SPRG file type. In Fall 1, the student programs file type identifies students who are eligible for and or participating in specific California state or federal programs. Fall 1 eligibility program records are used again to identify eligibility in state or federal programs, report English learner instructional strategies, which is done in LIP SPRG program records using codes 300 to 307, and can help to include students in the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup. This slide lists all the program codes that are collected throughout the year. Some programs are collected in Fall 1 or in the end of year. You are both able and encouraged to submit your program records on an ongoing basis throughout the year, as it is important to report and update students' eligibility or participation in CalPADS as soon as that information is available. Identifying the various program eligibility and participation allows for students to receive additional services. However, if you do this ongoing maintenance of program records, not all program records will show up on your Fall 1 reports. The orange table on the left-hand side of this slide contains the SPRG records that are formally collected in Fall 1 and will thus show up on your Fall 1 reports. So, for example, free or reduced price meal records using codes 181 and 182, gifted and talented education or GATE programs using code 127, homeless students with program code 191, and tribal foster youth with program code 193 will all appear or are expected to appear on your Fall 1 reports. This is in addition to the various language instruction program or LIP codes. Other programs that students may be participating in will not show up until you see them in end of year reports, even if you submit the data now. This includes Title I Part A programs, armed forces, pregnant or parenting, and so on as listed on the slide. You may notice that homeless program using code 191 will appear in both Fall 1 and end of year, meaning this information will be contained in reports in both data collection periods. CalPADS will automatically designate an SPRG record as either an eligibility or a participation record. Eligibility records indicate that the student has met the criteria to receive services for the educational program, but may or may not be receiving services related to the program. Participation indicates that a student is both eligible for a program and receiving the services associated with that program. The eligibility programs listed on the left-hand column of the table on this slide include homeless, 504, armed forces, pregnant or parenting, Title I Part C, GATE, and tribal foster youth programs. The participation programs on the right-hand side of the table include Title I Part A, the Opportunity Program, and the California Partnership Academy. In general, participation program data will show up on end-of-year reports, but some of the data does make its way into Fall 1 reports, such as Title I Part A. As you're submitting files and student data to CalPADS, that information is used to identify students who are eligible for LCFF funding and will thus show up on reports 1.17 and 1.18. Students will appear on these LCFF reports if they are reported as homeless, migrant ed, foster youth, and tribal foster youth in SPRG records with start dates on or before Census Day. So Census Day this year is October 4th. If a student is reported as homeless on October 5th, they will not be included. If a student is reported as homeless on October 3rd, they will be included. The National School Lunch Program and Direct Certification are the only two LCFF relevant programs that do not use Census Day as the cutoff point for inclusion in LCFF reports. The NSLP program start date should be on or before October 31st. Applications received and date stamped on or before October 31st, regardless of whether the application was approved by this date, are eligible. With regards to direct certification, students must be certified between July 2nd and November 2nd of the current year. All right, that concludes our discussion of the student programs or SPRG records. No changes to note in the data population training for SPRG records this academic year. Let's go ahead and move on to the student English language acquisition or SELA file. The SELA file type identifies the student English language acquisition status for all students, not just English learners, in order to determine assessment funding, and English learner services necessary. SELA records identify eligibility for the LPAC, English language acquisition status, whether TBD, English only, IFEP, EL, RFEP, or ADEL, along with the initial status date, and are used to include students in the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup for the LCFF. When performing CalPADS work in the SELA record, you'll want to ensure that you have all of the information on this slide from your English Learner Services department, including the English language acquisition status, primary language, status start date, and correction code if applicable. We recommend reaching out and letting your English Learner Services staff know what you'll need now if you have not already. The correction reason codes are particularly noteworthy. There is a specific sequence to changes in English language acquisition statuses, as well as certain scenarios in which statuses can be changed out of sequence. If you are changing an English language acquisition status out of sequence, you will need to use the appropriate correction code. The correction codes can only be submitted in online maintenance and should be submitted with reference to the When to Report a SELA Correction Code page in the CalPADS user manual. And we will cover the relevant portions of that page in the next 2 slides here. This slide contains the different English language acquisition status codes that can be submitted for a student. All students in kindergarten through 12th grade must have an English language acquisition status code reported in CalPADS. Students whose only language reported on the home language survey is English or American Sign Language are reported with an English language acquisition status of EO or English only. Students with a primary language other than English or American Sign Language are reported as TBD until the LEA has completed the initial LPAC assessment process. Students can only be TBD for 30 days upon initial enrollment. IFEP and EL statuses are the results of the initial LPAC testing. If the student shows English proficiency on the LPAC, they will have an IFEP status. If LPAC assessment indicates a lack of clearly defined English language skills, they will have an EL status. After some time, EL students may take the summative LPAC. If the summative LPAC results indicate that a student is English proficient, the student will be reclassified as RFEP. The ADEL status is reserved for kindergarten through 12th grade students aged 22 or older who are identified as foreign language speakers but are not eligible to take the LPAC due to age restrictions. It may be becoming clear that there are progressions from certain ELAS codes to certain others. Let's go ahead and make that as clear as possible. This chart shows the logical sequence of English language acquisition statuses. The first step for an LEA to take regarding English language acquisition status is to distribute and collect the home language survey to student parents. If the home language survey indicates English or American Sign Language is the sole language spoken at home, the student will be given an ELAS of EO. If the home language survey indicates the primary language other than English or American Sign Language, the student will be given an ELAS of TBD until they are given the initial LPAC assessment. Students may only remain in TBD status for 30 days. If the student is TBD and takes the initial LPAC assessment, the results will place them in one of 2 statuses. If the initial LPAC indicates the student is English proficient, the student will be placed in IFEP status. If the initial LPAC indicates a lack of clearly defined English language skills, the student will be placed in EL status. If a K through 12 student with an ELAS of EL becomes 22 years old, they will be placed in ADEL status. If a student with an ELAS of EL is tested with the summative LPAC and the results of the summative LPAC indicate English proficiency, the student will be placed in RFEP status. The arrows on the slide show the logical progression from the different ELAS statuses. If a change is being made to a student's ELAS that is not represented by an arrow on the slide, it is not a logical sequence, and a correction code must be used. This is the valid uses of ELAS correction codes table, which you can also find in the CalPADS user manual and provides the scenarios where correction codes are appropriate. Correction code 1, evidence of non-English primary language, should only be used for transitions from EO to TBD. Correction code 4, ineligible student LPAC tested, should only be used in transitions from EL or IFEP to EO. Correction reason code 5, evidence of EL or IFEP, should only be used to transition between EL and IFEP statuses. These correction codes are only applicable when the prior status being corrected has a date on or after July 1st, 2018. Correction codes or corrections must be done before the student takes the summative LPAC test. And there is one new change to the CLAW record this academic year with the new language code set in 23 to 24. This should have taken place with the rollover last night, so it should be in effect today, but at the latest, it should be in effect tomorrow. So be on the lookout for the new language codes in CalPADS starting tomorrow morning. All right, so the CDE is implementing the ISO 639-2 language codes. The language codes you populate in CalPADS must reflect this change. The CalPADS code sets document that LEAs can utilize to determine the correct codes to input into the system have been updated to provide the correct ISO 639-2 codes. The web page displaying the ISO 639-2 codes has been linked to and partially screenshotted on this slide, where you are able to see a sampling of the codes. The language option set includes the majority of the languages spoken by students and teachers in the state of California, with an other option for those languages not included in the set, and an unknown option for instances where the language spoken is not available. Student information system vendors will be mapping the former 2-digit codes to the new 3-digit ISO 639-2 codes, which will be most of the heavy lifting for this change. All right, let's go ahead and move on now to the special education record submission, which has the deepest and highest impact changes in the 23 to 24 academic year. The special education file types look quite a bit different this year based on the special education redesign. We're going to cover the special education redesign in general terms in the training today. For more specific information and guidance, you can find the special education data redesign video recording on the CSIS YouTube training channel. The recording is from Brandy's Special Education Redesign Roadshow and from the Sacramento County session. There are 4 new record types for special education in Fall 1. They are the meetings or MEET file type, which is used to capture the dates that specific types of statutory meetings were held. The MEET file will be used to monitor timelines of statutory meetings. Next is the status or SWDS file type, which is used to determine a student's eligibility for and participation in the special education program. Third is the plan file type, which is used to identify specific plan and settings that a student is on at any given time. And finally is the serve file type, formerly the SSRV, which is used to report services for children and students ages 0 to 22 who are eligible and participating in the special education program and have active plans or will have active plans during the reporting year. Formerly, the special education submission in Fall 1 included only 2 file types, with the SPED and SSRV files. While there is a relatively straightforward change from the SSRV to the SERV file in the 23 to 24 academic year, the former SPED file has now been broken up into 3 file types, with the MEET, plan, and status files. The meetings file is intended to capture the dates that specific types of statutory meetings were held, including initial evaluations, annual plan reviews, eligibility reevaluations, and pending meetings. The MEET file will be used to monitor the timelines of these statutory meetings. The Students with Disability Status, or SWDS file, is intended to determine a student's eligibility for and participation in the special education program at any given time. This is in line with the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act reporting, or IDEA reporting, as well as DataQuest and the California School Dashboard. The plan file type is intended to identify the specific plans and settings that a student is on at any given time. This is again intended for IDEA reporting and allows LEAs to submit any plan changes with specific start and end dates independent of meetings, which was not possible with the single SPED record used in previous years. Indeed, with the former SPED record, meetings and plans were thought of as relatively synonymous, but will have to be decoupled in our thinking of reporting data on students with disabilities in the future. Finally, the SERV file type, formerly the SSRV file type, is intended to report services for children and students ages 0 to 22 who are eligible for and participating in the special education program with active plans or will have active plans during the reporting year. These 4 special education records are not submitted directly to CalPADS with either online maintenance or batch file upload. Rather, special education data is entered into the local special education data system, or SEDS, and transferred directly into CalPADS from the SEDS via the Application Programming Interface, or API. The API is what allows this automated interaction between the local SEDS and CalPADS, which in turn allows for faster processing of special education records. The local SEDS system will provide a report after each instance of the nightly process with information on rejected records. Because of this API process, the special education redesign should have little impact on the CalPAD coordinator's work. CSIS and the CDE have been working with SEDS vendors to ensure that students with disability data will be sent up to CalPADS in the new file types, with no effort required from the CalPADS coordinator. The CalPADS coordinator will, however, be required to resolve any validation errors that arise from the SED submission via the API. Formerly, view and delete were the only 2 functions one could perform with special education records in CalPADS. Any modifications, changes, or revisions would have to be made in the SEDS. With the special education redesign, users with the SPED edit role are now able to add records and make modifications and revisions to special education data directly in CalPADS. However, guidance from both CSIS and the CDE recommend that LEA administrators use a high level of caution when assigning the SPED edit role, and in many cases, admins should not even assign the role to themselves. Guidance from both CSIS and the CDE is to make changes to special education data in the special education data system rather than in CalPADS. This is in order to mitigate against discrepancies between the 2 systems and the triggering of potential errors. There is a legal component to special education reporting, and discrepancies between the 2 systems could result in litigation. All right, let's talk about one more change, one change in addition to the special education redesign that will come up when reporting data on students with disabilities this academic year with the new disability severity codes or disability degree of support codes. The Commission on Teacher Credentialing, or CTC, is expected to adopt new credentials for special education teachers that would be effective in the 23 to 24 academic year. To determine whether or not a special education teacher is appropriately assigned for assignment monitoring purposes, it is necessary to capture the severity of a student's disability. These are the 2 disability severity codes: mild to moderate support needs and extensive support needs, defined in the CalPADS code sets document and screenshotted on this slide. These disability severity or disability severity or disability degree of support codes will be input into a disability severity field in the new plan record. And the data population for disability severity will likely be done in your special education data system. All right, that concludes our discussion of the special education redesign, and with it, our discussion of the different file types included in the student profile or included in the Fall 1 data submission. And at this point, I would again like to ask the guys, do we have any questions in chat? Anything that we should address explicitly or verbally before we move on to break?
If there are any questions that we missed, can you just put it at the bottom of the chat?
There's
Nate?
one.
Yeah.
I don't know if you answered it yet, but we were kind of trying to figure out the answer behind the scenes.
Yeah.
The forgive me if I say your name incorrectly. Anush
Yeah.
asked about the initial U.S. school enrollment date, if it's been changed to a TK date as opposed to kindergarten. The documentation still that's relevant for this year still has it as a K through 12 date, and that's also supported by the validations like a SINF0060. So we haven't seen that. We're still looking, but I don't know if that's a change coming, but we don't see that in the documentation nor our change. So I think it's still a K through 12 date. You can try TK date and see if it errors out. I think the SINF0059 has, I'll check that error. I think there's a limit to how young a student could be with that date populated. So, as of now, unless we update you all, the initial U.S. school enrollment still appears to be a K through 12 date, meaning that date in the field represents the kindergarten enrollment start date.
Thank you, Nate.
Well, there's still conversation. So Alex said last year she used TK. That's because last year TK was a program, and the student had a grade level of KN. So you can't go based on last year because the grade level was KN. This year, TK is a grade level, not a program. And so for TKs, the initial U.S. state enrollment would be blank. That's what we're saying. If you're enrolling your TK students, that field should not be populated. Or I don't know if we could take a future date, Kyron. No, you don't know the future date. You don't know what would happen for the students. So just like preschool students or your infant and toddlers in special ed, it's not required. You don't populate it until that student is kindergarten and above.
And if they're EL.
And if it's a plan change for the future, we're still looking for that. We haven't seen that. Certainly, it's possible that Aries would know because they have to inform the vendors, but we don't see that, and I don't remember that being discussed.
Yep. Thank you, Nate. All right. Thank you, Marshall. Let me share my screen. So before we move on, I just want to clarify some of the questions regarding the initial U.S. enrollment. So I think the crux of the issue is this one. So you have here SINF0060. So currently, if you don't, this only triggers for KN to 12, not for TK. So if you have a TK and the student comes back from LPAC as EL, it won't trigger this error. And let's look at the Fall 1 certification here. If we have a CDD, that might trigger. 1 second here. US. So again, this only triggers for KN to 12, not TK. So even if the student is TK and then the data is exported to TOMS as KN and TOMS sends back the status as EL, the CDDs will not trigger or certification errors will not trigger for the student. So you are good. right? Okay.